Hello and welcome to the Sideescape Gaming Podcast, episode 119. I'm Jake. That's Ted. We're here. Bro Show episode 2. Ted, I want you to hit me with a question. It's the Bro Show. It's how we started last time. Hit me with just crazy question. Whatever you want it to be. Mine's
How's your internet?
Oh, fucking solid. Unlike James's.
Yeah, my internet's pretty good too.
Yeah.
James is out this week due to weather.
Multiple days, Ted. He's multiple days without internet.
Multiple days without internet.
And we're worried about him.
Well, you're worried about him.
How do you function without internet?
He's got power, like he can go to a Starbucks and download Hades or something.
How many days, Ted, could you go without power?
I was ready to find out with all of these storm warnings, but my power has been fine. I think I could go a day without power, no problem.
Okay.
I think anything after day 2, and I would start to lose my mind a little bit.
I would hate the nights where it's just like super dark. Not a fan of the dark.
Yeah.
I'll say
I know you would go to bed, I think.
Just like at 8 o'clock.
Like, what do you do when the sun goes down and you can't light yourself?
That's like everybody back like in the medieval times, the old days, the dark days. They were getting up at 4 a.m. or whatever, and the light was coming out.
Yeah. That's stupid.
Stupid.
They should have invented electricity,
They should have figured something out. How do you do an alarm clock?
They'd be living the good life like us.
How would you, back in the Middle Ages, like make a meeting with someone at like 6 a.m.? Because you don't have an alarm clock. How are you getting up?
Fun fact, the alarm clock was invented in the Middle Ages.
How'd they do it? Rooster?
It was like they had a weight to a clock to like a water device.
They just dump water on you?
No, but it like dumped water on like a bell or something. Okay. But it was some kind of weighted, like early clock. Yeah, all right. It's fascinating. You can look it up on YouTube. But to answer your question, I wouldn't have meetings, I don't think.
No, right now I just wouldn't have meetings.
Yeah,
you'd be like a blacksmith or something. Like
I mean, you could like ring the town bell and like call a meeting, but like scheduling a meeting, not going to happen.
I liked how and you watched Andor? Did you watch Andor?
Yeah. Well, I watched the first half.
They got the guy that like hits the bell and that went down. Like it's like they're in the future. They're a long time ago, but they got like technology. Surely they got clocks, but they still got this guy doing the bell. Quite a job.
And he's great at his job.
He is really good at his job.
Yeah, he takes pride in his work.
All right, Ted. We're talking about something. You've been having a moral dilemma in video games.
I have. I know.
Like texting us a lot about this.
I texted you like 4 times.
4 times about it, and then like one night you were like, I have not stopped thinking about this for like 24 hours.
I've been thinking about this.
I'm not saying, but I have to close the door.
Yeah. And so I've been thinking about this topic just in my head. We are post 2022's Game of the Year.
Right.
And I think we've all come away from it, for better or for worse, kind of being like, oh, it was a dud. Like Elden Ring is a cultural phenomenon, but overall 2022 has been a bit of a dud.
Yep.
And so this question, I was thinking about it, and then I started typing in questions, just trying to figure this out. And so, I texted you, I texted James. We in this group chat together, and then you guys both told me to shut the fuck up. And then, James lost his power, so now we have a bro show.
James really did not want to talk about this. He was not ready. He was upset. He did not like that you texted us about this.
Please help me. And we were like, you just don't want to be here.
Yeah, James, you don't want to talk about some video games?
Yeah. Jake, what's the greatest video game of all time?
Right. I don't know. Like, I know what my favorite is, and I would argue it's one of the greats, and we'll talk about it. We're going to.
But is it the greatest of all time?
No, it's not. Because the greatest game of all time is probably Tetris, right?
Okay.
Like, what's the greatest? What's the greatest board game of all time? Like, what's the greatest game of all time?
Board game of all time?
It's chess. It's chess.
Chess?
It's
chess. My go-to?
And it is. It's because it's
for Eastern audience members?
Yeah, and it's been around forever. And it's the greatest game. It's got to be Tetris. They keep making Tetris as Tetris. They can't change Tetris.
They made Tetris 3D for a little bit.
Right, but it was still Tetris.
That's true.
Like, it still played exactly like Tetris.
Wait, are you saying the greatest game of all time is the way it is because it's never been changed?
Because it was perfect gameplay. And so if you're talking about a game like chess, it's the greatest game of all time.
Yeah.
But Ted, games aren't just about gameplay. Games,
or are they?
No, right? Like a movie's a movie.
This is the question that has been bothering me for almost 4 days straight. Because when typing in best game of 2022 and reading all of the articles about it, a lot of places link to their like best games of all time, or their like ongoing leaderboard of like these are, you know, X gaming websites best games in their opinion.
Right.
And so I've just been thinking about this because I disagree with all of them, but I don't know why. And so I've been bouncing questions off you guys for the past couple days about like what makes the greatest video game of all time. And I wrote down just for fun here. I wrote down a couple websites like top 5.
I would love this. Okay, I was gonna ask if you had this.
Yeah. And so this is just the top 5. And so the first one I'll start with is IGN's top 5.
Okay.
This is out of 100 video games. And they make a point of saying that, like, in their list, history matters, context matters, and order. It's not that order doesn't matter, but, you know, games that make it on this list are all there for a reason.
Yeah.
But this is their top 5. And I'm just going to throw it out there. We'll talk about it. Their number 5, Super Metroid. Their number 4, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. Number 3 is Portal 2. Number 2 is Super Mario World. And number 1 is Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild.
The number 1 game is Breath of the Wild?
Yeah, it was a big upset because they pushed Super Mario World down from its number 1 spot to allow for Breath of the Wild. But that's their top 5 games of, like, all time over the past 40 years.
What's another website you have there that you took, like, notes on?
Yeah, so, well, another one
don't read them, but are they the same? Are like the same
like
5 mixed?
Metacritic is very similar, but they have Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5 are on there. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was Metacritic's number 2 most top-rated game of all time.
It was Ocarina of Time, the number 1.
Ocarina of Time is the number 1 with like a 98 across all. And that's like a, you know, Metacritic's is a bunch of smaller reviews aggregating upwards.
Mm-hmm.
But then also there's like Games Radar, who puts Half-Life 2 at number 4.
Yeah.
Doom at number 2, for example. Breath of the Wild is their number 3.
Okay.
And then Dark Souls is their number 1 game of all time.
The original Dark Souls.
The original Dark Souls is their number 1 game of all time. And they justify that because it spawned the Souls-like genre. Yeah, and so in their opinion, it being popular enough or good enough to spawn a genre, it makes it the most impactful game of all time.
So what when you think of this question, like I said, if you were to say game, it's like, okay, it's probably gameplay focused. What is it to you? Like, what off the top of your head would probably be the best game of all time? Like, you have to think of one.
I know. This is the question that I've been asking myself for the past 4 days.
Because the question or this topic is not like, let's figure out the best game of all time, but like, what does that mean? Because it's
pause the video.
But I want to know what you think.
This is not two bros figuring out the best game of all time. No. That's a later episode.
We've probably done it before. Who knows? It's, you recycle a lot of stuff on this show.
We are not going to tread into those waters. Not yet. Not until we get a sponsorship deal. But we're just trying to figure out the context of asking what's the greatest game of all time.
Because it's different than a movie.
And this is why I wanted to take this to you. Because there are lists of like the greatest movie of all time. And off the top of your head, I know you haven't researched this, but like, what for you defines the greatest movie of all time?
I think like movies are interesting because they're so integral to like what entertainment is now. Like, shows, it all spawns from like movies and movie theaters. And so I think you kind of think of like what defined movies. And like, I would argue like I think a lot of lists, it's just like The Godfather is like the great movie of all time.
That's my go-to. Yeah. Not that I've seen it, but just because it's on so many lists.
But like you watch it and you kind of, it's a movie like you watch it and you're like, I get why this is like referred to as the greatest movie of all time. Mm-hmm. Like you may not think it is, but like I think it's different than like a game where like The Godfather is just kind of unanimously the GOAT. Mm-hmm. Kind of like, Tom Brady is kind of, he's got one criteria to be judged against, but like
his wife.
But his wife, yeah. But like a video game, there's so many different aspects of why and how you play video games. And like if you play video games to play with friends, maybe it's Modern Warfare. It changed how multiplayer was played. Mm-hmm. Or Halo 2. And is it defined by what it does to change it all and like set standards, or is it just like this is the best game to play right now?
Yeah.
We're like,
yeah, and that's my first issue because film, it at the end of the day, like
you're
film
watching a movie. That's all you do.
You're
with
watching
it.
a movie, and then you're reacting to it, and those are the kind of the elements that define it. The greatest movie of all time isn't necessarily its setting or the actor playing the star role, and like with video games, interactivity plays such a huge part in it. And so that's kind of where this rabbit hole took me. Is kind of my first point, which a lot of these lists claim to be the reason that this list exists, and that is, do you think context matters when defining the best game of all time? Shortened to BGOAT, just coining it here, BGOAT, best game of all time. Because Super Mario World, Zelda, Ocarina of Time, these are games that came out in the mid 90s, early 90s, on tube TVs, with controllers that were like less than 2 feet away
prongs.
from the TV. Yeah, like, but a lot of them justify these as being like, well, you had to be there at the time. If you were there when it released, if you could understand what this impact had when you got, Super Metroid in your hands for the first time in 1994, that's why this is so important. And I struggle with that just because I wasn't there in 1991 when Super Mario World came out. And so does that make me does that mean I just won't ever understand why Super Mario World is the greatest game of all time? But on the flip side, are we really going to sit here and compare Super Mario World to 2022's Elden Ring?
Well, but I think you can kind of look at it in one way as well, where like, talking about Elden Ring, in the future, there's going to be another game that could be the greatest game of all time that's inspired by how Elden Ring defined something. This open world RPG that you just roam through that isn't like got all these check marks and shit. Like that's going to be a thing that now every game's going to go do. Goodbye check marks on maps and stuff. Like that's just every game's going to stop doing that.
Right. Because
that's going to be great. But like, is that then the best game of all time 20 years down the road? Or is it because like Elden Ring fucking did it, man?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of for me, The Last of Us. Like I would argue in 2013, when The Last of Us came out, it was one of the best games ever made because like it did something storytelling wise that games just didn't do yet. Games didn't have like these like actors acting in scenes, like they were starting to with Uncharted, but it's still the same developer. Like the guys just stood there, and talked in every game that you ever played. Right. And so like, does that make it the greatest game of all time? Because it started to tell stories differently and showed that. So like, I think it's a harder thing than just like a movie is a movie. You watch it.
Right.
That's all you do with it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I don't know.
But like going back to movies, like Citizen Kane, a movie I've never seen, for the record.
I saw it last year.
Okay, perfect. Citizen Kane is, a lot of people say sincerely, and a lot of people joke that it's the greatest movie of all time. And a lot of its defenders will talk about like, oh, you just, this defined like movie making, right? Movies were different before this movie. This movie came out. All movies were different after this movie. Casablanca is a great example of this as well. But like its place in history is why it makes it the best.
Right.
And so should that factor into the greatest game of all time? To your point, does a game like Elden Ring become the greatest game of all time 10 years down the road where we're like, or Dark Souls, Games Radar Dark Souls became the greatest game of all time after the fact because of how many games came after it.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those conflicting questions of like, well, I wasn't there when Dark Souls came out, or one of these things like I can't be a part of that. I wasn't there when Citizen Kane came out. I wasn't there to see movies revolutionized. Does that matter?
Yeah.
Is the greatest game of all time a question about history? Yes or no?
I think it probably should.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. Like that's, I think, the hard question, because like why it's different than a movie though in some regards, like The Godfather, is you can have someone watch The Godfather and like it's still a good watch, and you interact with a game differently. And like, or a game's graphics can be bad now because of where we are now. And like, I was to just show like Maddie fucking Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Like that's not impressive. It's like blocky characters and it's going to be dopey. But like at the time when I played that when I was 5 years old, it was like, holy shit, what is this thing? I mean, I'm having an adventure. This is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, and it's that moment in Skyrim where you actually can walk to that mountain. like that's kind of silly to a lot of gamers nowadays, but like,
It's like,
there was a time when that really hit home.
well, and that's why like there's so much like negativity I think on Skyrim lately because it's come out on every console and a fridge and all this shit, right? But like, if you played Skyrim in 2011, that game was like amazing. We had never had freedom like Skyrim, you know, where like you could just be like, oh, what are you doing in this game? Yeah, like, oh, I'm actually at the Mage Academy. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, no, I'm like, going over here and learning how to be a master thief. And you're like, oh, we reached like 10 hours in. It's like, yeah, that's what you could just go do. And it's like, does it make it, defining as something in games? Is that kind of what also actually?
I know. I think history should matter, and maybe a BGOAT list, a best game of all times list, should be a little bit of a history lesson of like, it's not about like 10 games that are just the best and will always be the best. It's about 10 games that really like set the bar higher or really like had an impact at their time. But I read this video game review on Quora, the like ask questions and people can respond.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was like, Legend of Korra? Oh, okay.
No, Quora, like the website.
Yeah.
And I can't find this review, and it bugs me that I can't, because it's one of the greatest things I've ever read. It was somebody giving Super Mario Brothers, the 1987 or 1997?
The movie.
No, the game, the video game.
Okay.
Super Mario Bros. Giving it 1 out of 5 stars. And it was amazing. It started with being like, I don't know why people like this game. You can only move left and right. Like that was like their first nail in the coffin of like, you can only go left and right. That's stupid. And like when you get hit, you die. And it doesn't really tell you why. And there's mushrooms. What are mushrooms for? Like it just rails on Super Mario Bros.
That's
the like
awesome.
Foundation of video games. For these really basic things that like when you take a step back, you're like, I guess you're right. It is just like a 2D game. Games have gotten so much farther than just moving left and right. But without understanding that context, sure, it's a 1 out of 5 game.
That's interesting.
It made me realize that like maybe history is an important part of this.
But I think it is absolutely. But the ones that stay on the like kind of the test of time or whatever it is are games that still play pretty good today in a lot of ways. I would argue like RPGs I think are a little tougher to go back to, but that's just me because I'm not a big turn-based RPG person. But like those are when someone's like, you got to go play the old Final Fantasy VII, and it's like, yeah, like this is not my type of like combat game. How I like to interact with something.
Well, I mean, this segues great into my next question, which is, should graphics matter? Interpret that question however you will. Should graphics matter? Because I'm totally with you where as you go backwards in time from today's latest and greatest, graphics obviously get worse over time. And there's definitely a point where I'm like, this is totally fine. I can play games with old graphics or games with older UIs. And at some point, maybe in the late 90s, there is just a wall where like all of a sudden, like I just can't, my eyes can't interpolate the polygons, my brain can't figure out the UI, and I'm just like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Like a great example of this would be Resident Evil 2 original. Remember the old camera?
Yeah.
The old camera, which was how do you describe the old Resident Evil 2 camera?
You're like looking down at a room from like a perspective, and you're still playing as the character moving around that room.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's shorthand they call it tank controls, but really it's like the camera is just always going to be like
a fixed camera.
It's like a fixed camera in the corner of the room, and then left, right, backwards and forwards moves your character in that room.
Yeah.
Unrelated to the camera.
I hate it.
And it's just like going back to it, like at the time, I'm sure it was great contextually, but like if you go back to it now after playing, at this point, 20 something years of like behind the back third person shooters, it's wild. It's so difficult and so different. And when they remade it, Resident Evil 2, they took it out and they made it a third person shooter. Yeah.
It's a freaking great game and you should play it.
I know. Like, at what point do graphics matter? And kind of a sub question to that, do you think it's the responsibility of developers or publishers or IP holders to bring games forward as we move forward in time?
That's, I think, kind of, I mean, this like resurgence of remakes we're seeing is like, and there's all this like whole new wave of gamers coming up of like, now it's a very common thing to do. So it's like you see all these games that are only like 15 years old getting remade.
Yeah.
I think graphics do matter in a way. I think it's harder to go back to games that are like from the mid 2000s than like the 80s, because the 80s you had like this pixel art style that somewhat translates into an interesting looking thing. But like I do think like the polygons and the polygonal things of like PS1 and PS2, like it does not hold up anymore, and it's hard to get past that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's kind of an uncanny valley.
Yeah. But I think that's also true of like PS3, Xbox 360 generation a little bit as well. Of like that has like, you go back, you look at like the Modern Warfare 1 game, and like, man, Captain Price looks real rough. You know, like when he talks. So
there was back in the day, the joke was that their color palettes were always gray and brown.
Yeah.
And then you go back and it's like, that's kind of all they were playing with. It's interesting because like, I'll take IGN's top 10 list here. Some of these games, like, they can move forward with time and it's fine. Super Mario World, a game that I've been playing recently. If you take a step back and accept that it's pixel art, it's really beautiful pixel art. Like, I would argue that those graphics hold up today, no problem. Because if you were to take pixel art today and make Super Mario World, it would look pretty much the same, right? Mm-hmm. Pixel art hasn't really changed. But, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and I don't mean to diss your childhood game, but like, that's a polygonal nightmare.
Yes.
Like, it is early 3D, and it can look pretty rough at times. And it's on these lists, obviously, because of nostalgia and because people grew up playing these games. But like, kind of as you were saying, there's a group of young people coming of age nowadays who are starting to play video games with the Nintendo Switch and the PS4, the PS5, who are going to go back to Ocarina of Time, and without the proper context,
just
without watching a documentary beforehand, they're going to go, "This is trash."
Right.
Like, what the hell? What the hell, Dad? This is not a good game. And so is it up to Nintendo to remake that game for those people? Like, if Ocarina of Time is a great game, which I'm not arguing it's not, is it up to Nintendo to prove it, essentially, to put their money where their mouth is and give it a fresh coat of paint?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, because is it better to have it modernized or to leave it in the past and that's what you remember it as being transformative? I don't know.
And to go back to Resident Evil 2, I would say that we the people, if you will, the consumers have spoken in that they ditched a lot of choices made by the original game designer of Resident Evil 2 to make kind of a different but similar game, and it worked. Resident Evil 2 of 2018 is a fantastic game. It's awesome, and they left a lot of that stuff behind, and I am really excited to go back and play 2018's Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Much less excited to play 1998's Resident Evil 2? I don't remember.
That seems something.
I'm throwing a lot of years out here.
Yeah, you are. I'm impressed though. A lot of 98s.
They're probably all wrong.
Yeah. I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know. I think Ocarina of Time is a really good pick to like kind of have this discussion around, because it is like kind of one of the GOATs, like.
Yeah, the big goat.
Yeah, it is the BGOAT. I would argue that's probably one of the BGOATs, that and Super Mario World. But I don't know, and it doesn't play as good as a Zelda game now, like it's going to have control limitations that are kind of going to be a deterrent from a new person. And like,
I mean, it was designed around the Nintendo 64 controller.
Yeah, it's designed around holding a controller like this.
Matter, right? Does holding that controller affect its best game of all time status?
I can confirm, no, that does not.
That is one thing we can leave behind.
We can leave the Nintendo 64 controller in the dirt. No, I don't know. And I think that's like such an interesting conversation about it, because I think the movie comparison has to keep coming back up, because like you don't interact with a movie differently at all. And like with a game you do, and it gets better and better and better over time because it's more refined. Like playing a shooter where you don't zoom in with the left trigger.
No,
it's
classic.
Awful. It's so hard to go back to, because now we're just that's how games are made, is the left trigger is your zoom in button all the time. And so like that becomes super weird to like kind of go back to those games.
It's funny you mentioned that. For me, if you gave me a first-person shooter with a controller,
Yeah.
My right hand shoots the gun, my left hand aims down the sight.
Yeah.
That's the law.
That has to. Yeah.
But you give me a shooter on a mouse and keyboard, anything goes. If you want to do that and have and have no aim down sights, in my brain, that's totally okay. And it's totally a matter of like what my hands are doing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that should factor into a game. Is like, how did you play it at the time?
But I think if you judge a game for how it looks, just aesthetically graphics, you're probably also judging it for how a game feels.
Mm-hmm.
Because games are equally about the feel and about the look.
Yeah.
And Tetris. Still looks pretty good. Still looks pretty good. So, I don't know.
By the way, I think of the 3 lists that I saw, Tetris only made it into the top 10 once, and it was like number 7.
It's because it's
Russian.
Russian.
It got like the pity entry in that, like, yeah, it was important to history, but whatever.
That's bullshit.
I know. I thought it was insane.
Ted, what would be your game? Like, what's that gut check game? We kind of you didn't answer it back like 10 minutes ago. So what is that gut check game?
Does genre matter at all?
No.
Not at all.
Because games are so many genres. And I think you see from the top 10 of some of these lists, there are a lot of different genres. You're not getting like a Madden game, but it's not, come on. Would you argue Madden 12 was the greatest game of all time? No.
I was thinking about that. Because I could definitely see like a BGOAT list, a best game of all time list, being made of the best in class for a bunch of different games. Not that this actually happened or that we're planning on doing that.
No.
But like, a couple of the defending reasons why Super Metroid is on this list is because it holds up as being the best Metroidvania. It literally spawned the genre.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why it's on this list, even though there might be Metroidvania games that mechanically, graphically, little pieces of it do technically do it better. It was here first. And so I was thinking about genre and if genre should matter at all. Because on the flip side of genre, genre doesn't matter. It's like, how are you going to compare Super Mario World and its pixel art and its cutesy graphics to like, a blockbuster from 2022 where 400 more people
7
worked on
teams
it
across 8 countries.
Yeah, 7 teams from 8 continents. The moon's involved. Yeah, like we can rip on a Battlefield or a Call of Duty, but like they are graphically fantastic looking games. Like there is a lot that goes into making those games look and feel the way that they do.
Absolutely.
And to compare, Call of Duty Warzone to like little Mario is just like, get the fuck out of here.
I think that's why you get a lot of Nintendo games on these lists, though, is because they have that kind of quality throughout the years kind of feel to them, a lot of them. And then it stays around. Like a lot of their new games have, like the 2 Switch games, man, 1 and 2, Super Mario Odyssey, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, like same year. And those are like kind of 2 probably top, I don't think Odyssey is, but it was one of those kind of argued right away out of the gate of like, this could be the best Mario game. It feels great, blah, blah, blah. So I think, the modernness of that feel kind of comes into play sometimes, especially trying to show someone to go back in time to go play it. Because that's hard.
Right.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to genre, it's just like you said, there are so many different kinds of genres. And I don't know if that factors into it at all, but it also comes into like genres come and go. Video games come and go. It was really funny. I didn't get too deep into it, but I would love to. You can go back to like these websites, like archived posts, where they're talking about the greatest game of all time from like the year 2006.
Okay.
And Super Mario World is still on that list. A Link to the Past is still on that list. Like a lot of this stuff hasn't changed, and for good reason. But like Command and Conquer was on a lot of these lists. Like an RTS game from the late 90s was in the fight.
Yep.
And nowadays, you're not going to see that.
No.
Which kind of leads me to my next point of like, does the current events, just the trends that we have in gaming and in the culture that we are a part of, should that come into effect in that like games can be on your greatest game of all time lists and then as time goes on, they slowly ebb
Fade
away, like a Command and Conquer,
Yeah.
where it used to be in everyone's minds one of the best games of all times, and still a mechanically fantastic game, but just we haven't thought about it in a while. EA hasn't made one. RTSs are kind of on the back burner.
Yeah.
You know,
You got Dune Spice Wars, man. That's a pretty cool game.
all right, that's fair.
No,
but
no,
is
no,
Dune Spice Wars up in the best games of all
it's in my
time?
top 10, bro.
And if so, why is it there?
Totally forgot to mention in last week's podcast, but no, I think kind of so. I think especially with certain, like you were saying, genres that are just kind of fading away. Like gaming is really becoming behind the back, third person stuff, and then there's first person stuff. But it's like kind of those two camps, and there's not a ton.
It's 3D.
Yeah.
It's you, the person, the character, the user, interacting in a 3D world in a whole bunch of different ways. And 2D sneaks its way in there. Hades is technically a 2D game.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Like mechanically speaking, it's technically a 2D game. But you're absolutely right. Of like the 2D platformer is not a AAA entity anymore.
No.
Like even Nintendo, the last person holding up the 2D platformer, even their 2D platformers are not bangers necessarily.
They don't make Mario 2D platformers anymore.
Well, they do. Like the new Super Mario Brothers technically comes out.
That hasn't come out for a long time.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
The one from the Switch, I think, is actually a Wii U game. But like, even
hold on, Ted.
Nintendo.
Hold on, Ted.
Creator platformers anymore, and so that's why I think maybe you should split it up by genre to kind of give everybody a shot.
Yes. Sorry, your whole thing crashed, but you're back.
Jake, you're frozen.
You're frozen. We're both frozen.
We were talking about genre, and maybe the best game of all time is simply the best game of its class.
Yeah.
You know, you asked the question like, what's the best platformer, or who does platforming the best? And Super Mario World comes in and takes that belt, or that and then we have like a best shooter of all time. Who does the best Souls-like? And maybe that's how we figure out kind of the best game of all time, because it allows for older games to stay in the mix. It allows for more niche genres to kind of stay in the mix of like, who's the best stealth action game?
Right, yeah, I used the example in our last clip, but that Skyrim and Elden Ring, like Skyrim kind of started it and walked so that Elden Ring could run and do what Skyrim did, but just without kind of objective markers and kind of...
Yeah, arguably, every open world game since 2011 has run because of Skyrim's walking.
Right, and so like, does that make, like, has someone taken the belt from Skyrim, or is Skyrim still kind of up there in that regard?
And that was a question. That's the question of context and of history.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were joking when your internet was pooping out that asking me the question of would Fortnite be a contender for BGOAT?
I don't think to us, but yeah.
So I do want to make a stand here. I think that what Fortnite is doing is revolutionary and very cool in that they are truly a live game. Yeah. Right? Fortnite today is a completely different game than Fortnite of last year, and a completely different game than Fortnite of 2 years ago.
Right.
It's ever changing, it's ever evolving. It is about being there playing Fortnite now, not about Fortnite as it was. And while that's really cool, and maybe history will shine a light on how cool of an idea that was, I think that puts Fortnite at a real disadvantage of like, we don't really know what Fortnite is, you know?
I like this. Okay. This is a concept question.
So, yeah, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare.
Yeah.
I say that to you, it evokes a whole bunch of memories about your past, a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of history. It really changed the games for multiplayer in a really big way. And it's locked into history.
Yeah.
Fortnite isn't that. And so how do you define...
Hold on, Ted. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
I just kind of gave me a notice so I can come back to it. You were getting choppy, so we're going to slow down. Take it slow.
Okay. Oh, is this okay?
Well, because it was like freaking out.
Fortnite.
You actually did stutter over saying Fortnite too, which is pretty funny.
Okay, well.
Okay, all right. We seem good. Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Ooh, maybe not.
Yeah, it's locked into a time, and so if you said Fortnite's the greatest game of all time, somebody who played Fortnite at launch and nowhere else has no idea what you're talking about because they played a different game than you.
That's so weird to think about in just general terms.
Yeah.
That's bizarre. I've never even thought about that with Fortnite. Is that it is a completely fundamental different game.
Yeah, well, it's like Super Mario World, Super Metroid, Portal 2, games that are on top 5 lists.
Yeah.
We all know exactly what they are. And if you go back and play them on your Switch,
they will always be that.
It will always be that. Games that are coming out today are not like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's like, it gets them off this list, but maybe that's a different discussion that we should have of like, where does Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, an Ubisoft original, come into this? Because similar to Fortnite, it's a live game, right? They are adding new things. They are patching characters.
Yeah.
They are changing maps. Like, that is a live game, and if you're not playing it live with them, you are not experiencing what other people are experiencing, which makes it really difficult to quantify it as a game.
Yeah, all right, bro, let's dive into this thing. Is the best game of all time the concept of the game, man? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Is it like totally. Like the defining moment? Like, Fortnite's changing what fucking video games are.
Yeah.
And for a whole, age range of kids that are below us, I mean, because we're adults, but like that is what video games are. Video games are ever-growing products, like a card game almost back in the day. You know? I always thought that was really, really interesting. I think like with Magic the Gathering, and like that like the sets kind of stepped out. You couldn't play with certain sets anymore. That's like how it worked.
Some cards would be cycled in. Some cards would be unavailable to play.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, you can't use those cards more. Those are from like 3 sets ago. The Winds of Zendikar or whatever. You're like, oh fuck, okay.
Oh, that's a great
Magic set. It sounds like one, right?
Yeah,
the Depths of Gagagool. You're like, oh yeah, okay.
That's actually a Genesis game. So.
It's true. On the greatest games of all time. Yeah, I don't know. Like, is it the concept of the game and what that game's done, and what it, the footprint it left?
Maybe. I mean, Magic the Gathering is one of the greatest card games of all time. Not because it stayed the same, but because it continued for 20 years.
Yeah.
Maybe Fortnite will be hailed as the greatest game of all time when young people are still playing it in 7 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
History will let us know if Fortnite's the greatest game of all time. But I think it's a really interesting question because, and again, maybe a topic for another time, but at some point, video games changed from products to services.
Yeah.
And it's reflected in these lists. IGN, everything in their top 10, for sure, maybe even top 15, top 20, those are games that are products. Those are games that you could revisit today, and they're the same, give or take a controller or CRT TV.
Yeah.
They're the same as they were. And to your point about games changing and evolving, I mean, every single review website that's still relevant today judges games based on how they are on day one release.
Right.
That's where that number comes from, right?
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild was a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 on release.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean? 50 Cent's Blood in the Sand was a 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10, but now think of like the defining moments that game had for video games.
Okay, that was not a good example. But Fortnite or some kind of live game. Rainbow Six Siege actually is a great example.
Yeah, it was like a 7 out of 10.
Got like 7s. Yeah. That was not like a great game on launch, and they decided to stick with it and build more into it, and now people really love it. But that game, if you look it up, it's always a lot of these websites still listed as like a okay game.
Which is so
even
funny.
Though it's got this dedicated fandom almost, not 10 years, but like 7 years?
That game's been out for a really fucking long time. Like 2013, 2014?
No, later than that.
No.
2017? I need to know. I'm sorry.
I was living with you, but that was like in its like second season when I was living with you about it.
I know.
This is more important than the greatest game of all time. When did Rainbow Six Siege come out? I'm saying 2015 at the latest.
December 1st, 2015. You nailed it.
I had fucking 29 days to spare on that one.
Yeah. But yeah, that came out.
Yeah.
And was considered kind of an average, like not that great. And then it was built, and then it grew, and a community grew around it. And now it's still being played. It's now billed as, it's up there in the esports.
Yeah.
Does that affect its best game of all time status? Or maybe it doesn't. And at some point, Rainbow Six Siege will stop being played. Mm-hmm. Those people will move on to another game, and it will be completely forgotten as a live game event. And when you look back on it, you go, yeah, people played it. They worked on it. It was cool. But I don't remember those times, so I can't put it on my list.
Yeah,
who knows?
I don't know.
Are games as a service fucked in that sense of like, if you're not here playing it with me right now, I don't get it. I wasn't there with you. I don't understand it.
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely true though too. I mean, you get to the point where you just get kind of outclassed and the barrier of entry just goes up on those kind of games. But I don't fully know, and I think that's like, it's just kind of, what are video games to you? Are they the art piece statement? Are they a product? Are they a service?
Right.
And that's a question I think we're going to leave our audience with, because you're just on the verge of cutting in and out again. And I think this is a great time to end it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ted, gut check. What's the greatest game of all time? You got to say something.
Best game of all time.
What is it?
Advance Wars 2.
Okay. Advance Wars 2. You heard it here. That we are the only one that says that's the BGOAT. Thank you so much for watching the 119th episode of the Sidescape Gaming Podcast, episode 2 of the Bro Show. Despite technical difficulties, we made it through, and we still have internet, unlike James.